Excited to be here, right? First time, actually I'm Vietnamese, but like this is my first time like sitting in this like building this historical venue, right? So thanks a lot, BUIDL, for making this happen. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I think this is about interop, right? Panel. So. And I think we have like 3 previous talk, just talking about like, cross chains, bridges, and how to build like, dApp for different blockchains. So I think that basically like set up the background for everyone in the room, so that now we can like go into more like, interactive discussion about, many different questions around, cross chain and bridges and interoperability, right? And I think like people here, we have like different background. For example, like Sato is like very like Polkadot, focused. Arjun, I think you are really like focused on the Ethereum ecosystem, right? And I just learned that San is like, Cosmos bullish person.
I think I'm the imposter on this panel, but no, I think when it comes to interoperability, most of my perspective probably comes as an investor. I do venture as part of a small Web3 fund, and one of our big theses is looking at all the innovation happening in the interoperability space as kind of one of the areas with most opportunity kind of over the next year or two. So.
Awesome. Arjun and Sota, because like I think you guys are doing like cross-chain in your daily life, right? So what it means for you, and why did you like, pick up like interoperability as your, focus, right? Maybe you can share some thought.
So the reason why interoperability is really important, why did I choose interoperability? What's the question?
Yeah, like why you pick it, yeah.
Got it. So I think blockchain should be connected to realize Web 3.0. So Web 3.0 is definitely the big trend, but Bitcoin is not a web, right? And Astar, Polkadot is not a web. So we need an interface between people and protocol. And when we use Web 2 or even Web 1, we are not thinking of protocol because protocol is connected, but it was not connected. Internet was called intranet. And there are a bunch of the network, like UC Berkeley network, Stanford network, maybe Vietnamese network, Japan network, and it takes a day to transfer alphabet, let's say A, from Japan to US, and it was super expensive. But thanks to TCP/IP protocol, so right now it's super easy, and this is the reason why we can communicate simultaneously across the globe. And blockchain is going to be the same. Right now it's not connected. It's connected, but it's expensive and it takes time. But in the future, I think blockchain needed to be connected to realize Web 3, and that's why I'm really excited for the interoperability.
Yeah, that's a great answer. On our end, so when we started Connext, this was a long time ago, this was in 2017, the thesis was really simple. It was basically, how do we bring blockchains to 1 billion users? And obviously, like, one of the biggest problems that we were running into back then was just scalability. I see interoperability as just a core piece of that same problem, right? We know we can scale blockchains by moving to multiple different chains, but that creates this secondary issue of, it creates this user experience hurdle, this networking hurdle that where users need to now think about like what chain they're on and how they're interacting with a given application on a certain chain. And that's impossible, right? We can't actually get billions of users until we solve those user experience hurdles and make it possible for every normal person to actually interact with an application that's built on a blockchain in the same way that they interact with like Facebook or Instagram or Uber or Airbnb today.
Interesting. So maybe let's like go like to the root of the motivation, right? Because like I think you both, I think three of you already mentioned that there are a lot of like ecosystem out there. But then, so what we are seeing is that like there are already like layer ones that are like really scalable, right? That could like probably like process all the possible transactions that we want. And there are like layer 2 on Ethereum that is also like quite scalable as well. So why do we need like multi different chain, right? Why do we need like so many chains out there? Because like that's the main motivation for all the like cross chain stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean briefly, and it's funny to think back when Arjun is talking to when Connext was first founded. I think back then there was still this idea and narrative that it was really going to be much more of a winner-take-all market, especially amongst the layer ones, not even getting into kind of the layer two and further up the stack infrastructure, and that just hasn't played out. I think we're in a reality today where the future is probably going to be multi-chain, if not in the absolute long term, certainly in the medium term. And it's created this huge issue, both horizontally across all these layer ones. We're starting to see layer ones, I think, become a little bit more commoditized in terms of using each for what they're best at, and what the application layer, other feature set of that chain is. But that evolution is really hindered and stunted when you can't seamlessly transition across, or you have to use some sort of centralized infrastructure to do so, because it kind of wrecks the entire narrative that this space was founded on. But yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's two questions here, which is quite interesting. There's why should we have a multi-chain world, and then why do we have a multi-chain world? And I think that there's two different answers to those. Why should we have a multi-chain world is because I think people build fast blockchains, but generally speaking, there's the blockchain scalability trilemma is this idea that you can have really scalable blockchains, but in order to do that, you have to sacrifice some of the other things, decentralization and security, in order to be able to get there. And I think that's something that a lot of people in the space feel really strongly we shouldn't do. And so there's a need for having multiple chains, because you want to give multiple different kinds of security environments, give people like these trade-offs, so in that way developers can build applications like gaming applications on a chain that's lower security and build financial applications on a chain that's higher security. This is the reason why we should have a multi-chain world. The reason why we do have a multi-chain world is because a lot of VCs have a lot of money, and they've given a lot of money to a lot of projects. And of course, everybody has their own tokens, and and it's interesting because it's like the internet itself is very heterogeneous, right? Even like the internet is made up of a bunch of different networks that actually behave slightly differently than one another, and then they communicate with each other, as Sota mentioned, using TCP and BGP. But even and that happened even in that environment where nobody had bags. So I think the bag holder bias has really accelerated the fragmentation in this space.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And also one thing I would like to say is governance and the degree of the decentralization, centralization. So Ethereum is really decentralized. Bitcoin is more decentralized. But some people would like to control in terms of the updates to make faster chain or maybe cheaper chain. Then there are more centralized chains were invented, such as Solana. So I think the graduation of the decentralized degree is also an important topic. And what I agreed with is the money. When I choose a project, I'm always following the people, idea, and the budget. And the layer one is really proven in terms of the token economics. And let's say NFT or GameFi, it's really tough right now. So a lot of the VC would like to invest in a lot of the new layer one, let's Autopos or Sui or something like that. So in terms of the money flow, layer one will be, there will be a lot of the layer one. It's, I think, inevitable in this sense.
Yeah, the one other thing I would add too is even if this wasn't the case, I think we would still be up here talking about the same issue, because there's not just the issue of lack of horizontal interoperability between layer ones. There's even, within the Ethereum space, like where you focus, Arjun, we're now having the problem of vertical interoperability between the base layer chain and all of these different layer twos. And actually, that's where we've seen some of the biggest vulnerabilities exploited as well. So,
Interesting. Yeah. Arjun, I think you mentioned something I think you mentioned something about the trade-off, right? And I think this is something that we also consider seriously as well. So like Kyber Network, we are well known for building liquidity protocol, right? But we also co-founder of Wrap BTC, which we launched with BitGo and a few other partners back in 2019. So basically back then we were let's make something the most secure possible, right? And then we can talk about like decentralization and stuff later on, but we need to make it secure and usable. So that's why we launched Wrap BTC to bridge like Bitcoin from Bitcoin network to Ethereum and to bootstrap like all the DeFi liquidity back then in the most like centralized way possible. And then I think recently there are a lot of like bridges that try to actually like decentralize it, but I think most of them like ended up being hacked, right? So is it still a good idea to build a decentralized bridge, or should we like just like cancel it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think there's like, it's important to distinguish between like security of a system, like the implementation security of the system, and then like the trust minimization of it. Like implementation security it refers to when you write code, whether or not that code has bugs, and there are like fixed ways that you can reduce the risk of it having bugs. But there's no way to really get rid of that risk. So like you can do audits, you can have bounties, you can have other kinds of mechanisms to try to reduce that risk. But we are still finding vulnerabilities in SSL on the internet today, like decades after implementation. So it's a huge risk. And then separately from that, you have trust minimization. And I think this is kind of where the decentralization piece plays in, which is you can have really, really well implemented bridges like RapBTC, right? That are very, very minimal, that have very low risk of bugs, but they're not very decentralized. And you can have very decentralized bridges that have a very high risk of bugs because of how they're implemented. Why the decentralization piece matters is actually a different kind of attack vector, right? There's implementation security is for hacks, decentralization is for economic attacks. It's basically the reason why we've built blockchains in the first place is to move away from like the existing banking system where there are like custodians, and those custodians are like fully control your funds, fully control your ability to do anything. And if we want, unless we want to like end up in the same position again and just build fintech 2.0, the decentralization piece matters because ultimately you have to assume that when you're building technology that democratizes access to finance and coordination, that there are going to be people in the world that really don't want that to exist. And so it's like, I think there is merit to saying, yeah, like it makes sense to go for like a more centralized bridge that is a simpler implementation for now. But the reality is, we're building this space for people in 50 years, not necessarily for people right now as well.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, and
Sota?
I have a opinion regarding the decentralized bridge. Loi mentioned the decentralized bridge, but I think decentralization is very important, but it's not must to have. The must to have function is verifiability. So let's say layer 1 blockchain for Astar, a lot of the projects, a lot of the nodes are running on AWS or maybe Arjun, which is centralized and run by Amazon, right? Also, Amazon is somehow occupying layer 1, but this is okay. Not ideal, but it is okay if you have a choice to run nodes from scratch with your server. Right now, a lot of the people are managing, Bitcoin or maybe Ethereum on Binance, which is centralized. But this is not ideal, but it is okay if you have a choice to have Bitcoin on your ledger. So I think this is the important topic. And decentralization is definitely better, but verifiability is more needed for bridge. And trustless bridge is also better, but verifiability is the key in terms of decentralized bridge, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I think it's a deep, complex topic along a number of fronts. I think we're all in agreement. I will speak for myself. The reason I got into this space was when I found Bitcoin. I'm somewhat militantly anti-authority and control for the sake of control, and for better or for worse. And the open, censorship-resistant nature of this technology is a cornerstone of it. And I think we're all in agreement that ultimately what we need to build towards and the world that we need to create is one where interoperability like this is decentralized and comes with those strong guarantees. Now, I think it's a whole other conversation if you talk about where we've been the last 2 years and my opinion on kind of the architecture and how we've tried to solve that interoperability problem. I think we've maybe optimized a little too early for decentralization, or we've been building kind of with the wrong architectures for optimizing for that decentralization, especially because when you look at a lot of it, you know, without naming any names, there's been a lot of decentralization theater. You know, projects that claim that they're decentralized, and so they're built in a way that, you know, comes with some of those greater security risks, but behind the scenes, they're functionally centralized, and so you kind of get the worst of both worlds. What I'm really excited about, you know, today is where the innovation is going for how we think about enabling interoperability, and the innovations there. And I think both of you guys are great examples of it. We're kind of moving away from this world of trying to trustlessly transfer assets themselves to more, how can we create like the TCP IP layers between these protocols where we can kind of minimize both the specific attack surface around the asset values and who can access that, and put specific checks and balances in place around that while still allowing for kind of a rich cross-chain experience.
Interesting. Looks like all the panelists agree on, you know, it's important to build a decentralized and trustless way to interoperate between different blockchain, different ecosystem, right? And Arjun even mentioned that, you know, it might happen in like 50 years, right? It might not happen now, but like we have like to aim for the futures. So what is that like, you know, future look like when we get there, right? Like what are like according to you, what are the user experiences or like how things will happen then, right? And how do we get there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to touch on this point, like one of the stories that I find really interesting that really highlights why decentralization matters and why, probably the way that this ecosystem will also grow and like what we should expect in the future is the story of like the P2P file sharing wars. So I'm sure a lot of people remember torrenting, and I'm sure a lot of people remember that, you know, I mean everybody like everyone torrented for a long time, right? Everybody was downloading songs on LimeWire and everybody was like downloading movies on BitTorrent, and then we all kind of stopped. And the reason for that is a few economic things like Netflix existing, like all you can kind of watch models. But then also separately, just the really, really aggressive stance that the US government took against copyright and like the kind of Digital Millennium Copyright Act lobby that was created by a bunch of media companies. What happened as a result of that was so before this happened, right, there was like an explosion in peer-to-peer file sharing. And that was like that was actually the precursor to crypto. Like the core ideas around Bitcoin came from discussions that were being had around how to properly incentivize like people that were building peer-to-peer file sharing systems and people that were running, like basically hosting the data for them. The reason that a lot of that ecosystem died was because of regulation. Right? Eventually, there was enough regulatory headwinds that the projects that weren't legitimately decentralized, that didn't have a very like legitimate, you know, legal strategy for how to actually handle you know, a government coming and saying, okay, well, you're enabling copyright infringement, you need to shut down. Those projects died immediately. So things like Gnutella, things like LimeWire and FrostWire, and then really only one peer-to-peer file sharing system survived, and that was Bitcoin. Not Bitcoin, sorry, BitTorrent. And this is really interesting because BitTorrent didn't have a lot of market share. They had like 5% market share. They were this like dinky little protocol that was built by Bram Cohen and really didn't have a lot of marketing whatsoever. They didn't actually market it correctly in any way. But it survived, and that was actually the most important thing, was its resilience. I think that was the kind of key idea that went into Bitcoin as well, was like, how can we make this as resilient as possible? Because at some point, governments are going to come and try to shut this thing down.
I think you're starting to see the early innings of the we'll fight you phase really ramp up right now, to your point.
Exactly, yeah. Like we live right now in crypto summertime, right? Even though it's a bear market, there aren't, you know, it's like, governments are kind of iffy about crypto sometimes. They're trying to regulate it, but it's not, there isn't a consorted, like there isn't like a collective global effort by a bunch of different countries to try to shut crypto down. That isn't happening yet, but it will happen. And I think that's basically like the trade-off space that we have to think about. Is like, you know, when I say we need things that survive in 50 years, I mean, okay, like we can build this whole ecosystem right now. It can become incredibly valuable, but if regulators 5 years from now, 10 years from now come and shut down anything that is centralized, what's going to be left? And those will be the things that matter.
Yeah, so in this sense, I think it is really important for the crypto founders to deal with the government. We have to educate them to make better regulation. If they are not very educated about crypto, they're going to shut down all of them. This is nightmare for us. So I think a lot of the people just ignore the government or hate government. But in my opinion, we have to educate them in some sense. And we have to talk with them to make better framework. So this is really important. And when it comes to the future of the interoperability, I think in 2030 or 2040, probably when you deploy smart contract, no one care about which blockchain to build on, because blockchain is really connected. We are calling it the internet, right? The internet. It's not internet. So blockchain is going to be the blockchain. I hope.
Yeah, or the interchain, or whatever we end up calling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? You don't want users to have to consciously think about which network they're connecting to, anything like that. And that's really the thing that needs to go from all of this is this whole concept of needing to know about a certain chain. I mean, you know, it's like right now you have some of these big brands, right? You have Polygon, you have Arbitrum, you have, you know, Polkadot, you have Cosmos. These are huge, huge brands. But what happens when all of those ecosystems start launching their own chains? So like Arbitrum just launched Arbitrum Nova, and then there's also Arbitrum One, and then like Polygon is going to launch like several ZK VMs. People are not going to know the difference between these things at all. There's no way. I mean, none of our users know the difference at all.
What do you think about the future landscape of the multi-chain world? Is the single network or maybe 2 or 3 networks dominate the market share? Or do we have a multiple layer on blockchain?
I think it has to get to a point where I think you're going to have domination, but it's going to be domination in something like a communication layer. Like IBC dominates. Or like, I don't, you know, to Arjun's point, like I don't see us moving to a world where an actual, anytime soon at least, where an actual chain is dominating. But
yeah, I mean, it's like block space is, so up until now, block space, so the amount of like actual, you know, space that is available to do things on blockchains was very, very scarce, right? Which is why you were seeing such high fees on like any blockchain that actually got any use, was because it was just like, you were competing with other people to put transactions into a block. We are now moving to a world where block space is going to be commoditized. So everybody is going to have space to run transactions on blockchains. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens when that occurs, because like,
I mean, even from a security standpoint, like when a security budget for a chain in terms of the competition to mining is, you know, 1/100th of it is right now because of the, like, I don't know. Yeah,
like who is then paying for all these transactions, right? Like if you're mining a chain, you could be mining one of like several chains, but you might just not get any fees at all because there's just not enough people using these chains. So we'll kind of have to see what happens as this ecosystem grows. But it's a really good question, right? It's like, how do you how like in this kind of world, how will the incentives around blockchains make sense?
Well, I think like for the incentive, I think our stand is that like, you know, any incentive that is not sustainable is going to run out, right? Yeah. So it might be good like for a few years, but like whether it can like last for like 50 years, I don't think so. So in order like to last for 15 years, it has to make sense, right? Yeah. It has like to generate revenue or like things like that. People have to pay for it.
Yeah, and I think that's just the pendulum swing that you get with any sort of innovation. You know, to both of your points earlier, we've been in this world where the pendulum has swung maybe a little bit further, way too far as it should in terms of everyone launching their own chain because of the economic incentive and potential profit for doing so. But yeah, absolutely. As time goes on, as block space becomes more commoditized, I wouldn't be surprised to see that pendulum swing a little bit more back towards consolidation among, you know, I don't think it'll be a winner take all, but, you know, maybe a much fewer number of much more utilized chains. I think for interoperability, frankly, and it doesn't matter right now. It's the same problem to solve either way. But yeah.
Interesting. Maybe I can change the perspective a little bit, right? Because I think we've been like talking a lot about interoperate, you know, from the technical aspect, right? And also like from the asset, right? Like moving the coin from one chain to a different, or like moving the messages. But like let's talk about the culture, right, or like the community a little bit, because like I think like you can move the asset from one chain to a different, but like it's hard, right, to move like the community or like the culture like from Bitcoin to Ethereum, or like from Ethereum to say like Solana, right? So what do you think about that? Like do we need to care about it, or like it's okay to have like diversity, right?
That's an interesting topic.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question.
It's a challenging question for you too, because you're running a chain, so you have to.
Yeah, I understood. There are a lot of the maximalists, right? Ethereum maximalist, Polkadot maximalist, Solana maximalist. From my layer one, builder's perspective, inviting a lot of the project into our ecosystem is really meaningful and necessary to strong network. But at the same time, let's say, big Ethereum project, it is really hard for them for us to attract them, because they have a networking effect on Ethereum, and often they require very high incentive for their user, let's say 10 million or 20 million or something like that. So for me, we started from making our native application strategically, because in case of Polygon, the QuickSwap is really doing great, because QuickSwap is optimized for Polygon. So it is loved by Polygon community. So for us, we are making Astar native project first, but there are upper limit by making Astar native project. And then it's time to invite big project from outside of the ecosystem. Yeah, and to answer that Loi's question, it is really difficult, and it's true that we have a lot of the maximalism, like Astar maximalist or Polkadot maximalist, but it's the hardest thing is to prepare for incentive for especially big project right now. Sorry, I didn't answer your question.
I mean, I think like it is basically going to come down to being like culture wars, right? You have the thing that will eventually differentiate a lot of these ecosystems. Obviously, there's like the technicalities of the chains themselves, but to be honest, to most users and also most developers, that doesn't really matter that much. Really, it's about like the culture of an ecosystem that you kind of get attracted to, and then you stay there because there's a group of people there that like build on this thing that believe the same things you do or feel the same things you do. And so mixing those cultures together is going to be quite fascinating. I'm excited for an end to like the tribalism of, I mean, I was an ETH maxi, I'm still kind of an ETH maxi, but I also recognize that there's like a lot of value being created in other ecosystems, right? I think like Cosmos and Polkadot are fascinating. And so I'm slowly like moving towards the model of all of this stuff is very positive sum, which basically means like the market that can be captured is still like out there, and it's still like 80% of the world. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to like at this stage compete against each other, because the real competition is like legacy finance and legacy internet companies rather than like each other. But the incentives are weird.
Can I actually turn a question on you two guys and push you on something there a little bit? Because I think what I love about that question so much is, going back to where do we see this in 50 years? And to your point, Arjun, about, I think it's users not really knowing or caring what chain they're on. They're just interacting with the apps, doing the things they want to do. There's kind of an implicit assumption in that view that this question made me realize that, like, forget about the commoditization of block space. It kind of assumes a commoditization of the network effects within these specific ecosystems. And if that's the case, how do you guys see that playing out? Because right now, you're right, so much of the value captured by these ecosystems comes from the type of mission and community values that they have. So if we actually get to this world of interoperability that we're imagining, and all of those walls are broken down, and that 80% of the market still to capture really doesn't care, what happens then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, that was, that's just where my brain went.
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's like, building in this ecosystem sucks. It does, because the incentives are really weird, right? Like frequently have to, you realistically, like on a long enough time scale, you're competing with every single person, every single project in this space, right? Because everybody is like, there's just an incentive for every project to start doing everything. So like Chainlink, for example, like working on oracles, but then they are trying to head towards bridging as well. And it's like, you know, you don't necessarily want to compete with Chainlink because they do oracles really well, but then you might inadvertently end up competing with them. And then you have these other weird incentives where it's like, if you're a project that is like an open ecosystem, a lot of the time you end up working with people who are kind of competing with you, right? Like, you know, for example, on us, like one of the projects, that, like, there's a bunch of, you know, aggregators that build on top of us, and we support them. Like, we really try to make sure that they succeed because, you know, they're driving volume to us, but at the same time, they're also driving volume to our competitors. And so, like, it's kind of a weird situation where we want to win, but we also, like, you know, we want these aggregators to succeed, but we also don't want them to succeed too much because then it just commoditizes bridging. I think, like, I don't know if there's really a solution to that. Like, it's basically just like, I think at a certain point, like, you just get to the point where you realize it's just open, it's just like positive sum. There's so much competition everywhere. It's better to try to not stress too much about the competition and just try to focus your competition on like a few players rather than everybody.
Yeah, I think that it depends on the stage. Right now, infrastructure is not mature yet, and the competition is good to have, because competition make better infrastructure. And we had a lot of the competition in even Web 2, but if the infrastructure get matured, I think a lot of the layer 1 blockchain will be connected, and no one is going to talk about protocols. Then they're going to talk about how to make applications, just like now. So once, let's say, Google Store or Apple Store, get a market share, no one talks about how to make Apple Store better or something like that. And then I think the competition will be terminated once the infrastructure is matured. So we are still at this stage about this, and competition is good to have. But in this sense, it depends on the stage.
Yeah, it's good to have, but it's like interesting, right? Like the long-term, like thesis of all of this is that you can spend years doing research. I mean, there's so many projects doing this, right? Like you can spend years doing research and building the right infrastructure, spend tens of millions of dollars in VC money to do that, and then you can launch, and then the next day someone can fork you, raise just the same amount of money, put all of that money into marketing, and then win. So like I think long term, there's not. It's like it's hard to sort of imagine where this stuff goes, but you have to assume that it ends up just becoming perfectly competitive, race to the bottom. Everything becomes like public goods.
Yeah, and fascinating. Yeah, thank you both. And like I think ultimately too, we're talking on the technical side. We're talking about these closed, but really where this gets to is like the stickiest and area, and something I don't think any of us are good at yet. And it's one of my favorite parts of being in this space is ultimately like what determines the future based on all the things we're talking about is like societal change in aggregate. Like, what are the social contracts that end up getting created around these capabilities that end up scaling? And that will be fascinating to watch.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I've been like thinking about this like for quite a long time, but because like I think I was in back in like 2014 and 2015, right? I was like observing the like Bitcoin maximalists like just talking bad about like Ethereum and why it shouldn't exist and things like that.
Still they are.
2014 and 15? You sure not like last week?
No.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, long time ago, right? but I see the same thing again when Bitcoin, Ethereum maximalists like talking the same thing about like Solana or like Avalanche and things like that, right? And I was like, did the price of Ether actually like change their perspective, or did they actually like change, right? Interesting. Anyway, to observe, right? I mean, like I think some of you mentioned that like eventually there are going to be like all these like cross-chain communication protocol are going to be like public goods, right? Like become some standard that everyone can use and just like communicate with others. But then I think what we are seeing now is that like there's just like so many standards, right?
Yeah.
There's like IBC by Cosmos,
ICB,
HCMC by Polkadot, and I think Chainlink is coming up with their own standard. So how is it going to work out?
Yeah. So I think like we can take some. The good thing is we do actually have a couple of like interesting learnings here from the internet itself, which is people are going to build protocols. They are like there will be competing protocols. Over time, you end up in like you basically end up building things like BGP, like the Border Gateway Protocol on the internet, which lets you lets like sub-networks on the internet that are talking using one language communicate with other networks that are talking using another language. So you'll have like communication between these things that will happen, and we're kind of working on that already, and I know a bunch of other projects are too. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is like there might be like fragmentation around the specific ways that projects are like communicating between chains, but the interfaces are actually standardizing. So like if you look at the Connext interface, if you look at the interface for layer 0, you look at the interface for Axelar, you look at the interface for like, basically any of the projects that are now going and targeting, cross-chain developer activity, all of us have the same params and same interfaces. Like we all independently came to the same conclusions around how these things should be built. So I think in the long term, the economics of this space will actually drive us towards having like standardized interfaces at least, even if the protocols behind them are different.
That's interesting. It's like just a exchange, just like exchanges.
Yeah,
like although the exchanges has the really similar view, but some token are different. So it's like the same. Just matter of the time. Yeah, and the.
Arjun, I want to get back to your proposed future design, right?
Yeah.
So who's gonna create the standard to connect all these sub network and
hopefully Connext.
okay.
What's your plan?
I mean, that's the part of what we're doing is like we want, and again, I recognize there's going to be other people that are doing this too, because again, if any project innovates and that innovation ends up being interesting, other projects will come and do the same thing. So it's like we expect that other projects will compete with us on this, and a bunch of them already are. But the core idea, at least for us, is like, it doesn't matter where you're building, right? If you're building the ETH ecosystem on top of EVM blockchains, if you're building on Astar on top of Wasm, if you're building in the Cosmos ecosystem, like the core idea behind how you build cross-chain applications should be the same, right? That should not change. And that's what we want to do, is we want to make sure that the developer-facing interfaces are the same on every single chain. The experience is the same. And then on the back end, use whatever localized protocol you can that gives the best security. So for example, you can go around the Ethereum ecosystem using things like roller bridges and other kind of native bridges. But then the moment that you cross over into Polkadot, you switch to something like XCM. And to do that, you sort of hop through what we call bridgeheads, which are ecosystems like Astar that have both support EVM and also have XCM built into the.
So in this sense, the UI will be the same, but backend will be different. So let's say that each different blockchain has each different finality and also confirmation time, right? So probably user experience is going to be different based on the chains. Am I correct?
Exactly.
I see. Yeah, I do agree.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. That's why they cut our mic.
Yeah, no, I have not that. I'll let the two experts as far as that goes. But it makes a lot of sense, and I would say I'm seeing the same thing just from kind of watching the market and trying to learn from it. So yeah.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, I think we are running out of time, right? So probably if you want to say anything to the audience, 1 or 2 sentences, whatever you want to say, and talk to the audience, feel free to.
Yeah, it's really quick.
Yeah,
I was just yeah. Thank you very much for the talk. And the multi-chain is very inevitable. It's coming, I think, especially in 2023 and 2024. And we are literally at the frontier of the multi-chain era. So the important thing is to build, to be a frontier of the multi-chain movement, rather than criticizing outside of the ecosystem, or rather than checking price every day. Just build. So we cannot predict the future, but we can build the future. So this mindset is really important, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually really well said. I want to echo a lot of the same thoughts. I think people really don't understand how important this whole multi-chain, cross-chain ecosystem is going to be. If you assume that blockchains are sort of the new substrate by which we build things on the internet, then cross-chain piece, how we let blockchains communicate with each other will actually be the most valuable infrastructure on the planet eventually. Right? It will, because it's like, how do you connect what everything is built on top of? And as a result, it's one of the most difficult problems. And so I think even regardless of whether you're starting another project in the space, or you have an existing project and you want to start building things in this multi-chain environment, this is the right time to get involved with it. Like this is the time for people to build things and to think about what the future looks like, because there's so many opportunities and there's so many ways to like contribute at this stage.
Yeah, I would just say amen to that, and thank you both for the time and you for the moderation.
Thanks a lot, the panelists. Thanks a lot for the insight and interesting discussion. Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess with that, we are done. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very exciting sharings with us and to show our appreciation for your time.